Hebrews 8. Now the main point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest, who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being.
All right. So this is the main point of the discussion, that Jesus is now our high priest. Not just a shadow of the true thing, but the actual antitype, or the truth, the actual substantive aspect of what we're looking at. And Jesus has sat down at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven. I've recently had a discussion. My throat's a little messed up from, I guess, sickness. With some people about whether Jesus' reign will last forever. There are some passages that, would say that Jesus would reign until every enemy is put under his feet, and the last enemy to be defeated is death. Now, I believe he's already defeated death, but I believe he is still reigning. So I think that's really just a misunderstanding of that phrase of that he's going to step down from his reign or hand over the kingdom to God. I really believe, what's the difference in God and Jesus? They are one and they're united. So if he hands over the kingdom to God, then he's still reigning because he and God are one. But here we're talking about the high priest. Jesus is the high priest, and we've talked about he's the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And it also says he'd be priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And he serves in the sanctuary, the true sanctuary, not the temple made with hands, but in heaven, interceding for us, his children. The true tabernacle. Now, whenever we talk about the tabernacle, it should bring up thoughts about the Feast of Tabernacles, or booths, or Sukkot. So I believe what this is saying is that Jesus has fulfilled Sukkot. We now have a high priest sitting at the right hand of God who has fulfilled the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles.
Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven.
Okay, so what the Jews viewed as the most holy thing on earth, which would be the temple, where God's throne was, the Bible, and here in the book of Hebrews, describes that as a copy or shadow of the things, the true things, which are in heaven, where Jesus currently serves as high priest. So the temple was a copy or shadow of heaven.
This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle, "See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain."
The reason the pattern was so important was because it was to be a copy or shadow. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that, it really doesn't make sense that heaven looks exactly like the temple. The temple's pretty small. So I think heaven's far larger than the temple, the physical Jewish temple. However, there were specific things that God wanted the temple to reflect, such as the altar of incense and the burnt altar sacrifice, or burnt sacrifice altar, the table of showbread, the curtain between the holy place and most holy place. All those things represented different things, not because the physical image of heaven is exactly like that, but because every element of the temple was to be representative or reflective of certain things, true things in heaven.
But in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one.
All right, so people seem to have a hard time understanding the comparison or the value of both the old covenant and the new covenant. The old covenant being the Mosaic law, and the new covenant being the Christian system. I struggle to call it a law because it's really not like a law. It's more like a covenant, where God makes a deal with his people and says, I will be your God and you will be my people, and you will be saved by grace and mercy according to my desires. That some will be saved and some will not be saved. But my children will be saved by grace. That you no longer are obligated to obey every law perfectly in order to receive favor in my sight, but I will now bestow mercy for those whom I bestow mercy.
Since the new covenant is established on better promises.
So the new covenant is superior to the old one for many reasons, but primarily because we have mercy in the new covenant. Whereas under the old covenant, you had either obedience or punishment. And that is not a good way to live. That because no one can obey perfectly. So therefore, everyone was due punishment. And the new covenant is established on a better promise. The better promise being that we are saved by faith, are saved by grace through faith. That's much better. It's a much better promise than if you obey me, then you will find favor in my eyes, because no one obeys. So the new covenant is superior and better than the old covenant. The old covenant has been done away with. It is no longer applicable. So including the 10 commandments, some people say, well, the 10 commandments are still applicable. The whole thing, everything that God gave Moses has been done away with. Now, it is still true that you shouldn't murder and that you should love God and that you should, but I guess I wouldn't say it's a necessity that we observe the Sabbath day. But the reason we shouldn't murder or covet or lie or bear false witness or covet your neighbor's wife or anything else is because those are unloving things. Jesus' new law is to love one another. That's the law that we are to abide by in the Christian age, which is to love one another. And whenever you covet or murder or lie, then you're doing your neighbor harm.
For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another.
So that moves it into a little bit harsher territory where it says there was something wrong with it. Now, I do not believe that God made a mistake. I believe God designed the old covenant exactly the way it was for the exact purpose that he served, which was to convict all people under sin, to convince all people that they needed mercy, so that they could look to the Messiah and hope for a better future, that we could live in a time where we're no longer obligated to obey perfectly, but yet we have mercy and grace through our Messiah.
But God found fault with the people and said, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord."
So, in the Old Covenant, it was a system of obey me and you will find favor in my eyes. But people didn't obey, so God turned away from them. And he says the new covenant will be different than that. We're going to have mercy and grace in the new covenant.
This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest.
All right, so this says in verse 10, this is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time. Now, I would assume that this people of Israel is not just talking about physical Jews, because the physical nation of the Jews was also a shadow of the true nation of Israel, which is all the faithful. We are all Jews or descendants of Abraham, whoever of us are lived by faith. Abraham is the father of faith, and in the new covenant there is no longer Jew nor Gentile, but the Jewish nation of the old covenant represented the elect of the new covenant. That's the way I would put it, the elect. The Jews were the elect of the old covenant, and Christians, faithful Christians, are the elect of the new covenant. So, the people of Israel here in verse 10, I think, would apply to spiritual Israel or the faithful Christians, because we are the ones that God, I guess, puts his laws in our minds and hearts, and we are his people now in the new covenant. And I think this is interesting. No longer will they teach their neighbor to say, know the Lord. I don't know exactly what that's talking about, but I believe that if you know anything about God, it's not because you studied it or you learned it from someone else. I believe it's because God taught you that. Now, there are certain things that God teaches some people and not others. There are different aspects that he teaches about himself to some and not others. And you can't assume that everything you know about God is perfectly accurate, because he may be limiting your knowledge in certain areas, or you may be misinformed in some areas. So if you know anything that is true about God, then God gave you that knowledge. God opened your mind and put the knowledge in there. I would never take credit myself for any wisdom or truth at all. I would give God credit for that.
For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear.
All right, so this Hebrews chapter 8 is very strong in establishing the new covenant and doing away with the old covenant. So anyone who contends that we are obligated to keep the old covenant needs to study Hebrews chapter 8, because it is obsolete. It is being made obsolete, and it says it will soon disappear. So every book of the new covenant was written between 30 AD and 70 AD, including the book of Revelation. So this imminent fulfillment, this says the old covenant will soon disappear. Now, what happened in 70 AD that caused the old covenant to completely be obliterated? Well, it was the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and it has not been rebuilt since then. And I don't think the temple will ever be rebuilt. But even if it is, even if they do build it, I don't think it will have any true spiritual significance at all. In fact, it may be even be considered idolatry. It may be an abomination. Because what they're doing is they're denying their own Messiah. The Jews would be denying their own Messiah, and then they would be attempting to wrestle away the priesthood from Jesus himself. If they started instituting, the sacrifices again. And why would you even think that the end goal of God in his world, in his creation, would be to kill animals in a temple, in a physical temple? All that stuff of the Old Covenant in the temple was representative of Jesus Christ and his priesthood that would last forever, where there would no longer be a need for offering continuous sacrifices, but his blood that was spilled is good enough for all people, for all time. No need to kill bulls and goats continuously. But that's still what the Jews are seeking after. They want to deny Jesus as their priest, their high priest. They want to deny his sacrifice that covers sins. They want to deny mercy and grace of the new covenant. And they want to hold to the old covenant that has been made obsolete. And God put his final stamp of approval on Christianity and obliterated the Jewish system by destroying Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. That's what it means when it says it will soon disappear. The Jewish system will soon disappear, and it did in 70 AD. That's Hebrews chapter 8.